The world stands on a razor's edge, caught in a silent countdown where one misstep could ignite a firestorm that consumes the Middle East and pulls the global superpowers into a dark, inescapable abyss. For decades, the shadow of a war between the United States and Iran has loomed like a spectral threat, a conflict whispered about in the corridors of power and debated in the flickering light of news screens. But this isn't just a question of whether missiles will fly or boots will hit the ground. It is a deep, ancient game of chess played on a board stained with blood and oil, where the pieces are moved by historical grievances, religious fervor, and the cold, hard logic of survival. To understand the danger we face today, we have to look past the headlines and into the dark heart of a rivalry that has been simmering for nearly half a century. Imagine a land that was once the cradle of civilization, the seat of the mighty Persian Empire under Cyrus the Great. This was an Iran that stood as a titan of history, a culture that once shared a strange, ancient bond of respect with the Jewish people. But time is a cruel master, and empires do not stay golden forever. Over centuries, the weight of the Roman Empire, the influx of new ideologies, and the internal rot of feudal dynasties saw that power wither. By the mid-20th century, Iran had become a playground for the great powers of the West. It was a nation carved up like a piece of meat, the British eyeing the southern coasts for their maritime supremacy, and the Russian Tsars clutching at the north. Iran was a buffer state, a hollow shell of its former glory, waiting for a spark that would change everything. That spark arrived in 1979, a year that serves as the definitive fracture point in modern history. Before the revolution, Iran was a playground for Western influence under the Shah, a monarch who lived in a world of opulence while the whispers of discontent grew into a roar in the streets. The Shah's mistake was a fatal one. He tried to force a Western mask onto an ancient face. He threw lavish desert parties, importing trees from France and delicacies from across Europe, spending millions while his people felt alienated from their own culture and faith. When the revolution erupted, it wasn't just a political change, it was an ideological earthquake. The United States, which had gone all in on the Shah, watched in horror as its greatest regional investment vanished overnight. The embassy was seized, hostages were taken, and a new, uncompromising theocracy rose from the ashes of the monarchy. From that moment on, the United States learned a bitter lesson: the cost of a failed strategy. Just as the wounds of Vietnam were still fresh, Iran became a symbol of American humiliation. The assets were frozen, the diplomats were expelled, and the word enemy became permanently etched into the diplomatic lexicon. Washington realized it could no longer put all its eggs in one basket. It began diversifying its influence, pouring money and weapons into Saudi Arabia, Israel, and smaller Gulf states. But Iran did not simply fade away. It transformed. It became a master of the gray zone, a style of warfare where the lines between peace and conflict are blurred into a haunting haze. Today, Iran is not an isolated island like Venezuela, it is a regional heavyweight anchored in a geopolitical triangle with Russia to the north and China to the east. It is a nation that has spent 45 years preparing for a war it knows is coming. When we ask if the U.S. will attack Iran, we are asking if the U.S. is willing to enter a labyrinth from which there may be no exit. Iran's military is a strange, two-headed beast. On one side, you have the regular army, the traditional force meant to defend the borders. On the other, you have the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. This is the elite, the ideological vanguard, the force that the U.S. labels as a terrorist organization while Iran sees them as the guardians of the revolution. The IRGC doesn't play by the rules of conventional war. They are the architects of the proxy network, the invisible hand behind groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, and the Houthis in Yemen. This is why Israel is the most desperate player on the board. For Israel, Iran is not a distant political problem, it is an existential nightmare. The ring of fire created by Iran's proxies means that Israel is constantly dodging stones thrown by the little brothers while the big brother in Tehran provides the ammunition.
Israel knows that as long as the head of the snake remains untouched, the tails will keep striking.
But the head of the snake is hidden behind a natural fortress. Iran's geography is a nightmare for any invading force. It is a land of jagged mountains and scorched deserts. Unlike the flat plains of Iraq where American tanks could roar across the sand, Iran is a vertical maze. Thousands of miles of tunnels have been carved into the rock, housing missile silos and command centers that are virtually immune to conventional airstrikes. The American military leadership knows this. They remember the quagmires of Afghanistan and Iraq. They know that while they could likely take the capital of Tehran in a matter of weeks, that would only be the beginning of a nightmare. The moment the conventional government falls, the war shifts to the mountains. It becomes a decades-long insurgency against a population that, despite their grievances with their own leaders, possesses a fierce sense of national pride. If an external enemy crosses the border, internal dissent often vanishes in favor of a unified front against the Great Satan. This is the hedgehog strategy: make yourself so painful to swallow that the predator decides it isn't worth the meal. But there is a deeper tragedy within this thriller, one that involves the people of Iran themselves. The Iranian people are not the caricatures often seen in Western media. They are a highly educated, brilliant population with a massive thirst for progress. In the fields of mathematics, physics, and technology, Iranians are top-tier players on the global stage. From the halls of Hollywood to the boardrooms of Silicon Valley, the Persian diaspora is a testament to what this culture can achieve when it is not stifled by sanctions and religious dictates. Inside the country, the youth are restless. They see the prosperity of Dubai and Qatar, neighbors that were nothing more than small outposts when Iran was a superpower, and they feel the sting of being left behind. They face a future of no hope, where the currency devalues and the laws become more restrictive, yet they are caught between a regime they distrust and a foreign power they fear. This internal tension is what the US and Israel hope to exploit, but it is a dangerous gamble. If the US chooses to strike, it won't be a full-scale invasion like 2003.
Instead, the scenario most likely involves surgical, high-intensity strikes.
Imagine a night where B-2 stealth bombers and Tomahawk missiles target only two things: the nuclear facilities and the missile storage sites. The message would be clear: we won't take your land, but we will take your teeth. Yet, even this clean war is a fantasy. Iran has spent decades perfecting its retaliation. They don't need a navy to win, they have swarms of high-speed suicide boats and thousands of drones. They can turn the Strait of Hormuz, the world's most vital artery for oil, into a graveyard of tankers and mines. They don't need to defeat the US Navy, they only need to make the global insurance rates so high that the world economy collapses. The psychological warfare is already in full swing. We see the movement of carrier strike groups, the heated rhetoric from leaders like Donald Trump, who holds a personal grudge against the regime after ordering the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani. The Iranians responded with an $80 million bounty on his head, $1 for every Iranian citizen. This isn't just politics, it's a blood feud. And yet, beneath the shouting, there is a strange, cold stability. Both sides know that a total war would be a lose-lose scenario. The US would be isolated, abandoned by a war-weary NATO and a skeptical Europe that still feels burned by the US withdrawal from the nuclear deal. Iran would see its remaining infrastructure destroyed, dragging the nation back another 100 years. So the game remains in the gray zone. It is a war of assassinations, of cyber attacks that blink out power grids, and of proxies that fire rockets into the night. It is a war where a scientist is killed by a remote-controlled machine gun in the heart of Tehran, and a cargo ship mysteriously catches fire in the middle of the ocean. The world watches, waiting to see if the tension will finally snap. The true danger is not a planned invasion, but an accidental escalation, a missile that hits a target it wasn't supposed to, a ship that sinks in a sensitive area, or a leader who feels they have no choice but to push the button to save face. The dark truth of this thriller is that Iran is already being defeated, but not by bombs. It is being defeated by time and isolation. The brain drain is real. The most talented minds are fleeing to the West, leaving the country a shell of its potential. A nation can only survive on revolutionary fervor for so long before the hunger for a normal life becomes overwhelming. The U.S. strategy, perhaps, is not to strike, but to wait. To keep the pressure high enough that the system eventually collapses from within. But as any cornered animal knows, the most dangerous moment is right before the end. As the regime feels the walls closing in, the temptation to launch a final, catastrophic strike to reshape the board becomes almost irresistible. As we look toward the horizon, the question remains, will the U.S. strike Iran? If they do, it will be a strike of desperation, a move to stop a nuclear clock that is ticking louder every day. But if they don't, they must find a way to live with a regional power that refuses to play by their rules. The Middle East is a chessboard where the squares are shifting and the rules are rewritten in blood. In this dark thriller of geopolitics, there are no heroes, only survivors. And as the carrier groups move into position and the drones take to the sky, the rest of the world can only hold its breath and hope that the silent countdown never reaches zero. The tragedy of Iran is that a civilization so ancient and a people so talented are caught in a cycle of fire and shadow, waiting for a dawn that seems further away with every passing day. The board is set, the pieces are moving, and the world is watching the most dangerous game ever played.